All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War, and we are on to week 216, the Battle of Saint-Mihiel. Or Saint Michael? I don't know. I tried to be a little French there. It worked. Um, a new update. I think I'm gonna, while we still have the Great War videos to go through, these will continue to be the videos where I just kind of dump, uh, somewhat channel updates for you guys. I feel like the people that are going to be like interested to hear me talk about it are also going to be the same people that watch the Great War videos. So at least that's my assumption of the correlation. um, yeah, geography now I will no longer be reacting to. Senegal is going to be the final one because it was just a sudden mass copyright claim. Now, it was not copyright strikes, so I do not have to take the videos down. So the Geography Now reactions will still be up to watch. It's just, yeah, they got mass claimed by some company that I think is based in Portugal. Um, One of those kind of companies that represents, I think it's a very similar situation to what happens with Oversimplified, where Oversimplified is protected by some, he works with or has his copyright license or something being watched over by some third party company that he is not a part of and doesn't really have any say in how they operate. This is also speculation. I did not bother to do the research on this company aside from, are they likely to release my claim or whatever? And no, they will not release the claims. So yeah, it's unfortunate. I really enjoyed the Geography Now reactions. I was really enjoying the videos. But as things have been going on, especially as I've added in the fantasy author reactions to this channel, the time spent recording these things has taken more and more of my time. Before, when it was really just the historian reacts, I was like the first 2 years, I would say that I was doing this. I spent roughly 2 hours total recording 8 videos, roughly. That was the average. I would say maybe 3 hours at the most if I was recording some long videos, reacting if I was yapping a lot on some videos. But yeah, roughly 3 hours to record and then 30 minutes to edit them. Um, Lately, for the past, I don't know, over a year, especially after I added the fantasy author reactions, and especially after I've started doing the Warhammer reactions and Elden Ring stuff, now it's like still not long, right? Granted, this is still very lazy content, but I still do not get paid enough from YouTube to really have that time spent still be considered worth it, despite it being lazy content, despite it being content where I can get 8 videos recorded and edited in a weekend, takes me about 6 hours recording it, not including the time it takes to render the videos. Rendering the videos adds like another hour, hour and a half or so, because my computer is pretty good. Fortunate for that. But despite that, right, that's 6 hours for 8 videos. Over the course of those 8 videos, unless one somehow gets recommended, I will not. I will make maybe $20 from 8 videos that I spent 6 hours on, if I'm lucky. If I'm really lucky and one of those videos gets recommended, like the Warhammer video, gets around 60,000 views, might make I'll make my money back on that video, right? I'll make my money back for time spent for like 8 videos when a video does that well. But that is not the norm. YouTube is once again not recommending my videos, which I do not understand why. Interaction is good. Uh, Click-through rate is better than really it's ever been on an average for my channel, and average watch time is continuing to either stay consistent or go even higher, which is really good, right? So I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing differently. And so it's just, I'm not going to spend the time reacting to something that I know is going to get copyright claimed and therefore is just going to be a detriment, right? Like, while I'm looking for a job, I need to watch things that I'm fairly certain won't get copyright claimed. Um, so yeah, um, that's how it would be. But with all that said, I'm sure I'll think of something else to say, and I might say that in the next Great War episode. But yapped enough here, 5-minute intro. So let's go ahead and just dive into week 216. We are really hearing the end.
They've been fighting in the field for several months now, the Americans. But
USA.
something happens this week. For the first time in the war, an American army, with American commanders and American planning, goes on the offensive.
Is it a complete disaster?
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the Allies advanced in Siberia and near Murmansk, and the Russians exposed an Allied plot to destroy the Bolshevik government. This caused that government to declare a reign of terror on its citizens. The Canadians and the Australians continued leading the British advances on the Western Front, as the Germans retreated to the mighty Hindenburg defense lines. However, the British were in trouble defending the oil city of Baku in the Caucasus. That trouble looked worse this week. By the 12th, the Ottoman Army of Islam had finally concentrated around Baku. It numbered 7.
Like, I understand the Ottomans want the oil, but like, at the same time, I feel like we haven't really seen much example or really heard about the Ottomans necessarily needing the oil. Now, maybe that's just because of an oversight from the Great War series here, in which they've failed to mention the Ottomans are in desperate need of oil in similar vein to the Germans. But based upon the information that we have, that we've been given through this series, that I can remember, the Turks don't really seem to need the Baku oil fields. At the very least, they especially do not need it, more so than their German allies. And it just feels like this army of Islam is a complete waste of resources, because why are they're not even, like, the front lines that the Ottomans should be worrying about are down in Iraq and Palestine. What are they doing in that's modern day Azerbaijan? And Persia, like, what the why? What's the point? Aside from some vanity pride bullshit from the Pasha here, I see no strategic importance for this for the Ottomans. Because, like, if they weren't going to take Baku, then it would be under German control, which is an ally, which the Germans having access to oil allows them to fight more capably on the Western Front, which if they can fight more capably on the Western Front, then that means they are going to pull more of the British resources on attention towards them, and therefore there would be theoretically less attention on the Ottomans, which means the Ottomans would have a better chance of fighting the British in Palestine and Iraq. I see there is no logic in the Ottoman decision here with this army of Islam. There is no reasonable logic. None.
7,000 to 8,000 Turkish troops and 6,000 to 7,000 Azeri irregulars. In the city, the total defenders, including the British force under Lionel Dunsterville that had not yet evacuated, was under 8,000. As the week ended, the Ottomans prepared for the big attack. The real big attack this week was on the Western Front, the Battle of Saint-Mihiel, which took place the 12th and 13th. This was the first battle of the war, both conducted and planned by an American army with its own commander, and it would be supported by the French. Saint-Mihiel was a natural fortress, and the Germans had spent years building 5 defense lines with enormous belts of barbed wire, machine gun nests, and concrete dugouts. It was a really important spot as well. From here, the Germans could hit the flanks of any Allied attacks towards Sedan. Just behind the whole salient was the region containing Metz and Thionville, with all the iron ore and the steel mills the Germans had taken in 1914. This battle was American Commander John Pershing's baby. He thought the Americans had been wasted in defensive fighting for too long and wanted a U.S. Army formed to hammer
Let's get those
a real
shotguns in
blow
the
on
trenches,
the enemy.
baby.
Well, back on August 10th, the American First Army had been formed when American soldiers had finally arrived in enough numbers to form a full army. Pershing got his wish. Martin Gilbert writes that the Americans had tricked German high command into thinking the attack would come at Mulhouse. A copy of part of the operational orders for a Mulhouse attack had been thrown into a wastebasket at Belfort, and a German agent had found it, as intended, and passed.
Intelligence is just fucking wild. Like, let's legitimately take a critical lens at that story there. That's just fucking crazy. They're like, all right. Of course, it's safe to assume there are going to be German spies behind enemy lines. Always assume the enemy has spies. But to assume also that, like, your casual dumping of a note, half of a battle plan, into the trash is going to then get picked up by an agent, and they are going to then assume that it is a legitimate enough threat. Like, the fucking lot, like, to me, that's an extreme logical leap that I would not have followed. I know I would not be good as an intelligence service, but they just, every time you hear one of these stories, it's crazier than what is actually written in spy books and stuff. It's just, what the fuck?
Passed it on as fact. However, German Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff had been evacuating the salient for a few days since he noticed the American buildup near Verdun. For this attack, there would be 3,000 big guns and 40,000 tons of ammo. 15 miles of road were built using 100,000 tons of crushed stone, 45 miles of standard gauge, and 250 miles of light gauge railways were built. 21,000 beds and 65 evacuation trains had even been made available for the wounded. Over 200,000 Americans and 48,000 French attacked in the pouring rain on a 20-kilometer front. The Americans fired off 100,000 shells of phosgene gas, incapacitating thousands and thousands of Germans, and in the skies flew over 1,400 planes. The attackers had a 3-to-1 advantage in infantry, at least 5-to-1 in artillery, and over 7-to-1 in aircraft. Just a side note here, while both the Americans and French fought under Pershing's command, the big guns and the 267 light tanks were all French-made, and a lot of them had French crews. Anyhow, the encircling the Allies hoped for did not come about, and most of the German infantry managed to escape. The Allies took 7,000 casualties, and the Germans had 4,000 killed and wounded, and 13,000 prisoners lost to the Allies.
Ooh.
There were even some rather unusual stories about the surrendering of Germans. Gilbert writes of American Sergeant Harry J. Adams, who saw a German run into a dugout, but Adams only had 2 bullets left in his pistol. He shot them into the dugout entrance and demanded that the Germans surrender. So the German did. And then another one came out, and another, until 300 of them had surrendered. Adams marched them back to the American lines, armed only with an empty pistol. Apparently, when the column was first seen, some people thought it was a German counterattack. Overall, the Allies took over 500 square kilometers of land and cleared out the railway link. At noon on the 13th, the French entered Saint-Mihiel. When the Americans entered Essay later that day, they had a tough time.
That's a fucking massive victory. That's impressive.
Getting the locals to come out of hiding, for they did not know that United States soldiers were fighting in the war. American Brigade Commander Douglas MacArthur,
Never heard of him,
through the captured German lines at night, could see the city of Metz through his binoculars and thought, it didn't look all that well defended, and he proposed a surprise attack on it to his superiors. Such an attack, if successful, would have been a serious prize, but Supreme Allied Commander Ferdinand Foch was busy making plans for a big new coordinated offensive at multiple points in 2 weeks and didn't want any distractions. Still, straightening out the Saint-Mihiel salient was in itself a pretty big prize. The swift success stunned German high command, but the Americans also took heavy casualties. And while on the one hand, the Americans got a lot of praise for the battle and some real recognition for their soldiers' ability, there were still some big logistical problems. There were concern that the men were not adequately fed and clothed. There were certainly big issues with gasoline supplies. And a German intelligence report concluded that in spite of the success here, the Americans did not have enough experience yet to be feared in a large offensive. Allied commentators from different countries remarked that the Germans had gotten away pretty easily, and the American communications problems nearly immobilized their army. Pershing's chief of staff, James McAndrew, agreed with the assessment that discipline was poor and the artillery had been moved up way too slowly. But still, the overall plan that Saint-Mihiel was part of was running perfectly. The German salients were eliminated. The Germans were driven back from Paris and the Channel ports. The lateral railways had been liberated and would be great help. Foch was set now for his next big offensive. Already from day 2 of Saint-Mihiel, the Americans began the huge feat of transporting and redeploying hundreds of thousands of men for their next attack in the Meuse-Argonne sector in 2 weeks' time. But you know, it wasn't just the Germans who were having morale problems. All was not well within the Allied armies either. The 59th Australian Battalion, just settling down on relief after a solid week of operations, were called back into the lines. They initially refused to go, though they were eventually persuaded by their officers. But they, and basically every soldier, were going to be needed. On the 10th, British Commander Sir Douglas Haig asked the British War Office for mounted men and any munitions for a war of movement, which he anticipated would soon begin. He meant an offensive war of movement, which would be a first for the Allies on the Western Front for the whole war. People were on the move in Russia, though. The British advanced 40 kilometers this week on the Dvina River. American troops arrived in Archangel, but the Red Army had success at Kazan. Meanwhile, the terror continued, and foreign nations began to protest. In Petrograd, Bolsheviks massacred the bourgeoisie and threatened to execute British officials, even as the first installment of Russian war reparations to Germany is paid, 12.5 million British pounds worth of gold. And another week comes to its close, with Baku in dire straits, and the Americans and French, with a heavy numerical advantage, beating the Germans. And Douglas Haig prepares for a war of movement. An offensive war of movement. Wow. Really, in over 4 years of the war, that's something the Allies have not managed on the Western Front yet. Here's an interesting quote from the Great War generals on the Western Front. The French and British had spent a great deal of time and hundreds of thousands of lives beating their heads against the German defenses. But now all that experience was at last proving useful in better infantry tactics, in the use of artillery, tanks, and aircraft, in skillful combinations. Conclusion has to be drawn that in 1918, all the suffering paid off.
I don't know if I would equate the millions and millions of dead as being a reasonable exchange for a reasonable payoff here now in 1918. I feel like I don't know. I feel like some of these, most 90% of these generals here in this war should have learned some of these lessons that they are now actually implementing in 1918, all the way back in 1915 and 1916. Like there definitely should have been, I don't know, I feel like someone should have sooner tried the combination of infantry, artillery, and air together. I understand not the tanks, because the tanks are so unreliable that generals maybe wouldn't want to use them in coordination with a plan, because they're just so, kind of unpredictable with their reliability at this point in time. But at the very least, I'm thinking there should have been some more battles with coordinated airstrikes, artillery strikes, and infantry advancing. But no, that we really don't see that until 1918. by the Allies. So, yeah. Some of the lessons that they learned, I feel like, were lessons they should have learned a whole lot sooner. Uh, and I just kind of chop it up to pride and ego being why some of these fucking generals didn't do that.
The Germans were now being steadily beaten, and by the same generals who had fought at the Somme and Ypres and Arras and Cambrai and have since been roundly condemned for incompetence. As for Field Marshal Haig, he was by this time, without any doubt, the finest commander on the Western Front.
I hate that so much. Oh, I hate that so much.
Douglas Haig, the finest commander on the Western Front.
God,
Bet
no.
you didn't see that coming. And this from a book that has criticized him again and again. The Plot Thickens. If you want to learn more about Douglas...
And that was the Battle of Saint-Mihiel, the Great War, week 216. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.